This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.
Hey, this is Erin with Cornell Studio Supply, located in Dayton, Ohio, exclusive distributor of Jen Allen templates and Put a Lid on It t-shirts. We are a proud sponsor of this episode and the Brickyard Network. Find all your pottery and ceramic sculpture needs, including the largest stock of GR pottery forms at cornellstudiosupply.com. At Cornell Studio Supply, we are owned and operated for potters, by potters.
Hello, my name is Kathy King, and welcome to the For Flux Sake podcast. I'm coming to you from the Harvard Ceramics program in our fair city, Allston, Massachusetts. I'm here with Rose and Matt Katz of the world-famous Ceramic Materials Workshop, and they are ready to answer your burning questions about clay and glaze. Well, hello, Matt and Rose.
Hi, Kathy.
Hello, Kathy.
Are you two doing well today?
Yeah.
Why does it take you so long to answer that? Every episode, I'm like...
Because I have to think. I'm like, wait, what's going on today?
Rose, the thing you have to understand about Rose is not a chit-chat person. You ask her a question, she is going to think about it seriously. Hey, Rose, did you feed the dogs? Did I feed the dogs?
I think so.
Did I feed them enough? Are they happy with their food?
I was going to say, I think I might need to change their food. I
no.
wonder what I change it to.
Oh, my goodness.
Deep waters, Roses. Deep waters.
Just when you think you know somebody. All right. Well, it has been a while, and I think we need to take a trip to the materials corner.
You're going to put Matt in the corner?
Nobody puts Lord Celsius in a corner.
That's why Rose's pauses are so long. She's counting to 10 and holding her breath and waiting. Just doesn't want to hear me anymore.
Oh,
that's not true.
We do have a new materials corner, though. So the feldspar evolution continues here in the U.S. So this has been the big story for the last going on almost a year at this point.
The upheaval of 2023.
Oh, it's been going back even farther than that. We had the Mahavir, we lost the Mahavir came back. Then, of course, the big one was
the upheaval of the 2020s.
Oh, yeah, I know. The big potassium changes. Yeah, so we lost Custer feldspar. That was the big one. We've talked about that on the show. The mine closed down, which lost our last potassium feldspar from the States. Domestic. Mm-hmm. There used to be two. There was G200 and G200 HP, which is another long story. That disappeared about 10 years ago. They got to the end of the mining deposit. Then last autumn 2023, the Custer feldspar mine closed really unexpectedly, crazy unexpectedly. Like, they literally sent an announcement on November 1st and said they're taking no more orders, and that's it, and they're done. And that, I think I found out about that on like the 7th or 8th. So yeah, that closed down, and that was a really big deal because potassium feldspars are important for clay bodies, right? This is a huge deal, that you should not be using sodium feldspars in clay bodies. And we do still have one sodium feldspar available here in the States called Minspar. Sodium feldspars are fine in glazes, but in clay bodies, sodium is a big problem because it leads to clays being rubbery and short right? So they're not very plastic. It leads to problems like plucking, right? That's the thing where you go to pull your pot off the shelf. And although there's no glaze, literally like chunks of your foot stick to the kiln shelf. That tends to be worse with things like the silicon carbide, the advancer shelves, things like that.
And what did you call that? Plucking?
Yeah.
Plucking.
Who came up with that name?
It's not a bad name. Yeah, see, Kathy, you guys don't use the advancer shelves in the studio, right? You just
We
use
do.
corduroy.
Yeah, no,
You
we do. Yeah. In our
You haven't-
Cone 10. No, I can't afford them for the electric kilns, but yeah.
Yeah, no, you don't see it a lot because you should not be using a sodium feldspar. But what happens with sodium feldspars is that they're slightly water soluble, and sodium then dissolves and is then in solution with the water. So then when the water dries, it comes back to the surface and you get these almost invisible deposits of sodium on your clay body. So you never really see them if you don't know that they're there. But what happens is it stays around, and then you've got naked foot ring, and it's on a silicon carbide shelf. Naked foot ring, it's scandalous.
Matt, you shouldn't talk like that in public.
I should put some clothes on my foot ring.
It's a family show, people. Family show.
And then what happens is the sodium forms a simple glass with the silicon carbide shells, because silicon carbide, part of it is silicon, which turns into silica. Anyway, and so then it sticks, and when you pull it off, it breaks because literally you formed a glass that's bonding the shelf to the foot. That happens with sodium. Like, this is one of the multitude of reasons why you don't use a sodium feldspar in a clay body. So you really should be using potassium, because potassium doesn't have these problems.
So you're just justifying using regular old kiln shelves.
I don't know.
I don't have that problem.
We use the advancer shells. We just don't use sodium feldspar, so it's not a problem. So Custer was a huge deal because all the clay manufacturers were using it for their clay bodies, or at least they should be. Can't say all of them were, but they should have been. And Custer was not a perfect feldspar by a long stretch of the imagination. We have talked about that. I'm sure we can talk about it again in the future. It kind of had bad chemistry to it, but at least it was potassium and it was cheap. And that's the biggest deal with our materials, is shipping, right? The biggest cost in all of our materials is shipping, because Custer was coming from South Dakota. I think it was Crazy Horse, South Dakota. But it made it cheaper than having to import them. But the mine closed. We don't know why. People always speculate about why, but it closed down. So now we hit this huge problem that we don't have any potassium feldspars available in the States, and everyone needs it for their clay body. So what had happened over the years was when G200 was a deposit that was in the States, they got to the end of that mine. Imerys, the company that owns it, they started importing a product from Spain that they called G200 EU. It has nothing to do with the original deposit, except that they're both potassium feldspars, and they own the brand name G200, so they just called it G200 EU. They had started bringing that over, and that was, 10 years ago or so. And that works fine, but it's imported, so it costs more money. On the other side was Laguna. Laguna, the big supplier out on the West Coast, although they have a national presence, they started bringing in a feldspar from India called Mahavir. And Mahavir is a very nice feldspar. We like it. We use it a lot, but it was being imported. And so what happened is, all of a sudden, when Custer went away, everyone making clay needed a new feldspar, and no one was prepared for this. No one saw this coming. It literally basically shut down at a moment's notice, and all the clay makers like, what am I supposed to do for feldspar? So it's led to this huge bottleneck of lack of feldspars. So we talked about in a previous episode, Imerys is going to be bringing in another feldspar from India called G200 number 2R, which is a bizarre naming convention, but okay, sure. So they're bringing in that one.
They really are trying to squeeze everything out of that G200.
Kick in with that G200 name. I mean, it's that marketing thing of, they're really assuming people have got loyalty to G200 as a name. And I don't care. It's a feldspar. They're all basically the same thing.
Well, you don't. I recommend it to all my friends. I mean, come on.
I'd sit around in my coffee
Do
clutch.
you? Well, all this was going on, it was so confusing, and we didn't have time to wait for
Yeah.
what was available. We we recalculated everything to NEF-SI. And you've always said if the science is correct,
Right. For
Right.
glazes, that's fine.
Right.
Doesn't really
It's the
matter your
clay
glazes
bodies,
because
yeah.
in
Okay.
your glazes, sodium and potassium are basically the same. Sodium and potassium are so similar in a lot of ceramic engineering literature. They refer to KNAO, which is just anything sodium or potassium, because they are so close to being the same thing. But in our clay bodies, that just becomes it's a deal breaker. You should not be using NEF-SI. You should not be using sodium feldspar, because it will make huge problems down the road. So Imra starts bringing in this G200 number 2R. The reporting that we are now getting is that Laguna is going to bring in a second feldspar from India called Vardam feldspar. Now, what I am told is Mahavir is not going away. In fact, quite the opposite. But Laguna has decided to bring in 2 feldspars now because they could not get enough Mahavir to fulfill. Basically every clay maker in America needs potassium feldspar, and they got to get it from somewhere. And literally Mahavir, they're an international supply chain. I saw some in Australia when we were in Australia that there was Mahavir there. And so they just couldn't get enough. So now they've gone to this second feldspar, Vardam, and that's going to be coming in the next couple of months as a second feldspar. Looking at the analyses of all these, getting into the nerdery, I'm not here to play favorites. I'm not here to, well, I'm going to totally play favorites. I don't have any dog in this fight. I still think Mahavir has the best chemistry of all of them that I've seen. It's the closest to a pure feldspar. I have not used the Vardam. I have not used the G200 number 2R. I have seen their chemistries of what the companies are publishing. Mahavir's is still better. I can tell you, because there were some Mahavir supply issues a couple of years ago, we converted the clay body that we make for our test tiles, because we make our own casting slip to make our own test tiles. And we did a conversion from Mahavir to G200 EU, the Spanish one, and it took 10% more G200 EU feldspar than Mahavir to get the same level of vitrification in our clay body. And G200 EU is a good feldspar. I am not critiquing it the way I was Custer. Like, Custer had problems. G200 EU is fine. The chemistry I'm seeing for G200 number 2R is fine. The chemistry for Vardam is fine. I just like Mahavir better. And it's funny, I hear that all the time. Like, we go to the ceramic supply stores and people know who we are, and they're like, so why do you like the Mahavir? Like, literally, I was at the ceramic supply store last week, and they're asking me for feldspar gossip. This is the sad state of my life.
Gossip.
And this episode has been brought to you by Mahavir feldspar. Thank you.
They're all good. I will say on the Mahavir, total rumor. I am spreading rumors and gossip. I am hearing, those of you who have bought Mahavir in the past will know it came in this mesh woven bag that kicked up a ton of dust. I am told they're moving to a paper bag, so it should be less dusty. I don't know whether that's true. May just be a rumor. But that's the word on the street.
Wow.
Right from the Feldspar Wars.
Well, thanks for visiting us at Materials Corner, everybody. Thank you. All right. So let's do our job and get to the questions. Our first question is from Ben from Somewhere Mysterious. And Ben is a brewer by day, but also has questions about glazes.
Oh.
Ooh.
Can you please speak to what role, if any, water chemistry may play in glaze recipes? My partner is the potter, and through her journey in testing glazes, I have become an amateur chemist myself as I aspire to be the future studio tech. As a brewer, however, in my day job, water is a crucial ingredient with the mineral content as well as pH playing a critical role in the process. I've seen no mention of water as an ingredient aside from its role as a suspension medium and specific gravity. Thank you.
It's a great question. You guys just use tap water, right, Kathy? You're not doing anything special.
Yeah. No, nothing fancy.
And that's all you ever used in production, right, Rose? It's just plain old city water.
Oh, yeah. There's no fancy water in production. What are you kidding me?
We ain't got none of your fancy water up in here in this tile factory.
Going down to the pond or the creek.
Yeah, it's like
or the
you're lucky
buckets.
if it was city water. Like sometimes they're like, "Oh, just get some water from out back." Like what?
You and your fancy educated waters. I make only mine with fitness water.
Got balanced electrolytes.
I mean, the hilarious one that Rose and I would always hear is, we went to the school Alfred out in Western New York, and you would always hear these rumors about people that were like, oh yeah, like after I left school in Alfred, I could never get my glazes to work because it was totally what was in the water in Alfred.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, right. I've heard that. Yeah.
No, those are people that are bad at chemistry, everyone.
Wait, they weren't just putting lithium right into the water? I mean, everybody was pretty happy. I mean, come on.
That was always the joke about Alfred, is that there was lithium in the water supply. I don't know. People seemed a lot more depressed for there to be lithium.
It's a long winter in Alfred, New York.
It is a long winter out there.
But yeah, as to Ben's question, it is a good one. In a lot of industries, water is important, and people in ceramics generally do not pay attention to water. But to cut right to the big part of the question, no. From a chemistry standpoint, what is in water makes no difference to the chemistry of our glazes. And in fact, we had a great example of this. Rosa Turco is one of our students in Rome. And she took our online glaze chemistry class, and she asked us the same question. And she, interestingly enough, Rome, Italy, not Rome, New York, Rome, Italy publishes their water analysis, and she sent it to us. And Rome's water is pretty hard. It is 89.6 milligrams per liter. And 89.6, that's a large amount, but you also have to step back and go milligrams, right? That's 1,000 parts of a gram. So 89 out of 1,000 parts of a gram per liter. That's nothing, right? From a glaze chemistry standpoint, that is just not enough calcium to add into the water. But I didn't stop there. I went and did the math of adding 89 milligrams for a glaze batch of, say, 100 grams of glaze. It came out the same as adding in 0.01 grams of whiting into your glaze recipe, which is,
wow,
that's a sneeze. Like, scales are sensitive. In our lab, we've got the worst problem that we've got we got a heat pump. We have a heat pump for heating, and the fans blow. It's mounted right by our batching area, and we have to turn off the heat when we're batching glazes because the fan will make the scales bounce more than 0.01 from just having that heater pointed at our scale. So it really is nothing added to the water. And even later on, we had another student who had asked their brother, who was a water chemist, whether or not hard water could contribute. And the response that I got was that he just laughed and said, no, there is no way anything that is dissolved in water can contribute to the chemistry, because as soon as you put in the minerals that we use, right, all the powders, they're just minerals, they are concentrated forms of those materials, and that's what we're using. And so the added content is really nothing. And I know you get the people, oh, I have to use distilled water or spring water or whatever. It does not matter as far as the chemistry of the glaze. Now, that said, does water play no effect to a glaze? And that's where I would say that there are still questions. Now, it's not the chemistry of the glaze, but one of the things, and if you spend a lot of time listening to us, one of the things that we often talk about is how glazes work and how water affects glazes application or its viscosity, how the liquid glaze flows. And that's where I still have questions. I do not think it is unreasonable to believe that hard water could change the viscosity of your wet glaze, which is how the individual particles interact when mixed with water. And that something like very hard water with, say, a calcium or a magnesium could act like adding Epsom salts to your water. And those of you who've ever added Epsom salts, you'll know that Epsom salts will thicken up your glaze, and they change the viscosity. They don't change the specific gravity, but they change the viscosity. And viscosity and specific gravity are the two metrics that you need to be concerned with as far as glaze application. I don't have any hard proof to show this. This is actually an experiment that's on our long list of things to do. And I think we're going to try to do that for our YouTube channel here in the not too distant future, of try all sorts of different water and measure their specific gravity and viscosity over time. And we'll do it with, a bunch of different water contents. But I think that is a possibility that your viscosity may change with different sources of water, but I don't have hard evidence to it. But can it affect your chemistry? No, there's not enough. There's literally not enough molecules to change your chemistry.
And good thing we don't have to deal with pH.
I know.
That's another thing. Ugh.
Yeah, if we had to add in that as a variable, people would lose their freaking minds.
I would, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wonder what the brewer or what Benjamin has to say about the act of, or the old clay wives' tale of adding beer to your clay mix to make it more usable or help it age. It's a waste of beer. Why would you waste beer like that?
Yeah.
Well, believe me, that's the nicest thing I've heard to add.
I know, right?
Yeah, there's some other stuff that's not so pleasant.
None of them are doing anything, so we'll leave it at that.
All right, so let's go on to our next question. We've got a good one. We have Patricia, who wrote in from Cape Town, South Africa. And Patricia wants to know, what is happening with CMC in glazes? And how do you deal with adding CMC to glazes?
Kathy, do you use CMC itself ever?
I do, yeah, because I brush all my Cone 6 translucent tinted glazes onto my pieces. So I do use CMC, just a little dabble, do you? And it just helps the glaze be more fluid. It just flows from the brush a little bit easier. And yeah, it's really great. I've never, nor would I ever add it to like a big bucket of glaze. I'm working with maybe like a 500-gram container of each of the colors that I will add the CMC to.
And how do you add it? What's your method?
I mean, I take the powder, I mix it with hot water, I put it in a blender, let it sit overnight. Or like at least a number of hours till it looks like globs of gelatin, and then mix it up. Yeah, very globby. And then, I mean, I think I might put, I always say like a quarter-size dollop, which might be like half a tablespoon, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Just in 500 grams. So not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But that's
not a lot. No, but you can literally see it go. And I always use the milk example of, like, you can see it go from milk to like a half and half. Mm-hmm. Not quite heavy cream, but more like a half and half. But you can see it as you're mixing it. It just kind of thicken up a little bit.
Yeah. Unfortunately, our international viewers aren't going to know what half and half is, because of all the places I've traveled, I have not found half and half outside of the U.S.
Okay, light cream, maybe? Like a light cream?
Yes, I think it's light cream.
There's all the creams. We had that crisis when we went to Australia last year, because we were staying places for a long period of time. We went to the store and we're like, where's the stuff you put in coffee?
Yeah. Like, what's light cream? What's heavy cream? Yeah, I don't know what this is. Am I adding whipping cream to coffee? Maybe.
Not a bad idea.
American invention. But yeah, slightly thickened milk, like a yogurt drink or something like that. And Rose, you guys never used CMC in tile, did you?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
You did?
We did. The only thing is when I first started, they added it to the ball mill. And that is like, basically you're just throwing money into the ball mill and you're just not doing it. You're grinding it up and not using it effectively. So, but after that, after we decided, okay, that's not such a good idea.
I would think it would coat the mills. Like,
No, it's in such a large batch and it was barely anything, but it got milled down, so it didn't do anything.
right.
Like
Right.
it had no effectiveness whatsoever. But we would add it into the barrels that we would pull for right before we added it to the line. It would help with viscosity for us.
Similarly, like you had it in a solution.
Yeah, we had
mixed
it
up.
in a slurry, yep, and then added gosh, it wasn't much for like a 50-gallon batch. It was maybe a cup. It wasn't much at all. And yeah, a little dab will do you. Even though we're talking about 50 gallons, it was still a small amount. Yeah.
And then you all probably know more about it than I do, but the fact that it does break down over time.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes,
Ooh.
it doesn't last forever. Yeah.
like their Amico sells gum suspender, and I know they have a kind of a date coding on each of those. It's just important. I always just write the date that I mixed the CMC or added it to the glaze, just so I can remember.
When we moved 5 or 6 years ago, I found an old canister of CMC liquid mixed up in the back of our old studio.
Oh my God.
And
It was
looked
like a science experiment. Yeah, it was awful. I was like, what is this? Oh. Like,
it was gross. Although
yeah.
that said, I don't think we actually, for people that don't know, we're already going off on CMC horror stories. CMC, for those of you who don't know, is carboxymethylcellulose. And it is generally the number one brushing agent. As Rose said, you can do it in other applications, but as Kathy's talking about, that you use it to make glazes more quote unquote brushable.
So that what brushable means you get a thicker application with less coats. So you'd get, or I'm sorry, you extend your brushes. So you get a more even coating than if you don't have it, it kind of dries out right away on the brush. If you add CMC, you can get a longer brush stroke out of it and get a more even application.
It's not exactly scientifically accurate, but the way that I always like to talk about CMC is that it's called a brushing agent. That's what they'll say, that as Rose is saying, it allows you to brush more. What it really is doing is actually keeping the bisqueware from absorbing the water in your glaze. So those of you who've ever tried to brush on a dipping glaze, right? You have your big bucket of regular glaze you dip pots in. What you'll know is that as soon as you start to brush onto that bisqueware, that the bisqueware the glaze dries instantly, and just you can't even get out a full brush stroke before it, you start to get the little fingers and it just gets dry. And that's because your bisqueware absorbs the water in your glaze. That's why glaze application dries so quickly, because you dip a pot, you pull it out 10 seconds later, it's bone dry, and that's because the bisqueware drew the water in. It has what it's called capillary suction, and it draws the water into the bisqueware, and we're not waiting for evaporation. Evaporation takes a long time, which is why it's really hard to apply glazes to work that's already been fired up to temperature, because then you've lost your capillary suction because you vitrified and you're waiting for evaporation to take place, which is slow. And that's why you can heat your pots to apply glaze on already heated ware, because then you're forcing it to evaporate because it's hotter. So what CMC does is that it keeps the bisqueware from absorbing the water. It basically ties it up in the water and in the glaze particles, so you can brush it and brush it and brush it, and then it doesn't have to, or it doesn't get sucked into the clay body, so it just can be more consistent. And it can help with self-leveling. Like if you are using it in a dipping or a pouring application like Rose is talking about, because the glaze doesn't dry instantly, that application can sort of smooth itself out and get you more level application in something like a dipping application. Although, as Rose is saying, it's not really worth doing for a dipping application because it can get weird and all of that. So that's really the purpose. And like all commercial glazes, like they're plain old recipes like you may have or get from a book or get from Glaze or whatever, and then they're just generally adding CMC to them to make them brushable, is mostly what those commercial glazes or underglazes or whatever are. And so, you're adding a lot of that stuff. And then like usually if you look at the analysis for like a commercial glaze, it's the glaze batch, CMC, And then they'll generally add a fungicide, something like Proxil or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, not enough for the reds sometimes. Oh my God,
Yeah, need
those
a
are
little
deadly.
more for that one.
That's a conversation for another time that I want to know about, because I hear about this, but I don't use them. But we'll save the red conversation for
I'll
later
send you
time.
some.
No,
Gladly.
I'm good.
No, thanks.
But that's really what it is, and so it makes it brushable. You can use CMC. Notice both Kathy and Rose said mix it with water first. Do not try to add straight CMC to your glazes. It will turn into a clumpy, nasty mess.
Boogers.
Yeah. Well,
turn into boogers in your
She
glaze,
said it, not me.
then
and
it's gross.
hot water is better.
Yeah.
It'll quicken things up quite a bit. Just think of like Knox gelatin. It's very kind of similar in how it reacts in the water.
Oh yeah, that's very similar. And you got to mix it. Like Kathy, you use a blender, use a drill bit with a paint blade or something to really plunge it.
And the day before, you said that too. Like, you give it some time. Don't assume you're going to make your CMC on that day and have it ready to go.
No.
The technical specification is generally to make up a CMC liquid. It's 30 grams of CMC per liter of water. For all of our non-metric fans, deal with it. I don't know what that is in freedom units. 30 grams
Go
per
buy
liter.
some seltzer in a liter bottle, add 30 grams to it. There you go. Drink the seltzer first and then add your water back in.
But I know our lab assistant, Julia, thinks that that's too strong. And I think she may be down to 20 grams per liter. Because she thinks, that even like a little drop is just too much. So you can do it depending on how you like it.
We're also dealing with smaller batches. The
It's
smaller batch, it's like more oomph, I think. Like I've seen that.
Well, I'll say with my glazes, if I have overdone it and I've added too much, I have just added a little water into it, and that kind of balances it out. So you really develop an eye for each glaze and how much CMC you want in it. But it's not the end of the world if you are a little heavy-handed.
Yeah,
So.
and if you mix it into your glaze and it sits around for a year, that CMC is not going to work anymore. It's gone.
Bye-bye.
It's broken down.
And
so.
that's why it's rots too. I mean, like cellulose is like paper. It's biological. Like it's a carbon-based life form at one point, or derived from carbon. And so it can break down and rot, which is why it gets into that nasty science experiment. I do know that, there are sort of fancy fungicides and antimicrobial things that you can use. I know a lot of the commercial glaze companies, when you go and read their documentation, they will say you can add a couple of bleaches drops of bleach to it. Now, it depends on your sensitivity to bleach. That would send Rose running out of the room screaming.
No, thank you.
It will kill what's there, but it is a limited lifespan because that stuff is breaking down at all times. And which is why a lot of stuff is sold in small containers, because they want you to use it because it won't age particularly well. It might dry out or it might do whatever.
Yeah, I think it's so much more cost effective to just buy the powder from your local supplier and just mix up a little bit at a time as needed. And always, just date your containers. But oh my goodness, I could talk about CMC all day, but we have run out of time. So we're going to have to put our brains back on the shelf.
I've got something else to say.
No, cut him off, Kathy, cut him off.
Cut off. All right, you two, till we see each other again.
Bye, Kathy.
Later, Kathy.
Bye. Well, folks, that's it for this week's episode of For Flux Sake. I'd like to thank the listeners who submitted questions this week. And if you want your question answered on the show, shoot us an email at ForFluxSakePodcast@gmail.com. So join us next time. And when in your studio, remember what Rose always says.
Always remember to test, test, test. This is a test of the emergency glaze system.